Hi class, I hope that you're all doing well. Welcome to our first video in our module on late adulthood, where we're going to be focusing on the tremendous growth in this segment of the population. We'll also be looking at some key terms and concepts, including longevity and life expectancy. And we'll be looking at some very interesting areas of research as we begin to explore this very important topic of late adulthood. There have never been as many older adults alive as there are now. So you see many more older people than your great-grandparents or even your parents did. The proportion of older adults in the population of industrialized countries like ours has increased tremendously. And this is mainly due to better health care and to lowering women's mortality rate during childbirth. Let's consider developed countries first. They're the ones that are on the left side of this image. Notice the shape of the population pyramid that you see here in 1950. And this is the one that's shown in the top panel of our figure. In the middle of the 20th century, there were fewer people over age 60 than under age 60. So the figure tapers towards the top. And if you compare this to projections for 2050, which is in the lower left corner of this image, you can see that a dramatic change will occur in the number of people who are over age 65. These changes also occur in developing countries. The images for developing countries are on your right. The figures for both 1950 and 2014 look more like pyramids because there are substantially fewer older adults than younger people. But by 2050, those images in the bottom of this figure, the number of older adults in developing countries will have increased dramatically, changing the shape of the figure. So because the growth of the child population in the US essentially stopped through the middle of this century, the average age of Americans will continue to rise. In the US, the sheer number of older adults will place enormous pressure on pension systems, as you can imagine, especially Social Security and healthcare, like Medicare, Medicaid, and long-term care, and other human services. The costs will be borne by smaller cohorts like yourselves or like me, who are tax-paying workers that are paying for the services of older people. So this growing strain on social services will intensify because the most rapidly growing segment of the US population in this group is people over age 85. The number of such people will increase nearly 500% between 2000 and 2050, compared with only about a 50% increase in the number of 20 to 29-year-olds during the same period. So think about this. Individuals over age 85 generally need more assistance with daily living than do people under 85. This is going to put a strain on the healthcare system. Older adults in the future will be better educated too. By 2030, it's estimated that 85% will have a high school diploma and about 75% will have a college degree. Why is this important? Well, better educated people tend to live longer, mostly because they have higher incomes, which gives them better access to good health care and a chance to follow a healthier lifestyle. Internationally, the number of older adults is also growing rapidly. These rapid increases are due mostly to improved healthcare, and nearly all countries are facing the need to adapt social policies to incorporate these changing demographics and the resulting societal needs. And it's not just countries like ourselves that are struggling with this or who will be struggling with this. Other economically powerful countries around the world, like China, are trying to cope with increased numbers of older adults that strain the country's resources. By 2040, China expects to have more than 300 million people over age 60. So it's actually already addressing issues related to providing services and living arrangements for the increasing number of older adults. And China and the US are not alone in facing these increased numbers of older adults, as you can see here in this image. The population of many countries will include substantially more older adults over the next few decades. And all of the countries will need to deal with an increased demand for services to older adults and in some cases, competing demands with children and younger and middle-aged adults for limited resources. Currently, men and women 65 and older make up about 13% of the US population. And this is a number that's expected to be more than doubled by 2050. Now, while this means more senior citizens, it also means more career opportunities for those who choose to work with them. And actually, the Bureau of Labor Statistics projects faster than average growth for a number of senior-focused careers between now and 2030. I provided some examples here, but I wanted to share with you some of the growth rates. It's projected that there will be a 33% growth rate in the area of occupational therapy, and that for physician assistants, that the growth rate will be 31%. Working with older populations can be very rewarding. It provides you with the opportunity to make a difference, and it's a great opportunity for you to consider as a student, especially if you're new in school and you're not really sure what you're wanting to major in. I think exploring this area can be a great option. So people who are working with an aging population can experience a lot of satisfaction in helping people who are older. And ultimately, they're helping people who are older to live a healthy quality of life. And so people who work in a field where they're helping senior citizens may work as an occupational therapist, perhaps as a rehabilitation counselor, or they may work as medical researchers or as audiologists. And I have some additional ones that are listed here. Ultimately, when you work with older people, you can benefit your entire community by encouraging everyone to promote and support the older population by promoting their wisdom and their creativity. I think what you'll find as we look at this chapter is that there are a lot of stereotypes that people hold about the elderly, and this can have a negative effect on how people age. And as a society, when we're doing this, as a general society, and individually, we may not be doing that. But as a general society, when we're doing this, this can negatively affect how older people age. And ultimately, we as a society then miss out on the opportunity to gain insight from the older population who's lived long lives and has wisdom. So it's really a great opportunity not only for you to serve the older population, but to serve your community and the future of your community. For those of you who are interested in the study of late adulthood, I provided here some very interesting topics of study for you to spend some time exploring when you have time. And I just also wanted to highlight for all of you in the class some of the hot topics that researchers are focusing on. So of course, number one is cognitive decline. There is no doubt that finding solutions to cognitive decline and the behavioral problems that are associated with it is a central area in the study of late adulthood. Understanding, for example, the pathophysiology of Alzheimer's disease, this is of great importance. Perhaps when you reach late adulthood, there will be a cure or prevention for Alzheimer's, hopefully sooner than that. This is of significant importance because 1/3 of people who are over 85 have Alzheimer's. Now, there's also some interest in hormone replacement therapy and how that may improve cognition and slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease. But I do want to point out that there's a lot of research showing that hormone replacement therapy in women actually had resulted in a greater degree of cognitive dysfunction, and that it actually increased as well some women's risk for developing cancer. So there is some interesting research though for men, and there's a belief that testosterone in males may actually improve cognitive function. So this is a very interesting area of study. Depression is another one. Depression remains under-recognized and undertreated in older persons. This highlights the need for continued screening. And this is particularly important because we know that depression is associated with worse outcomes following heart attack and when people have diabetes or congestive heart failure, or for people who are undergoing rehabilitation. Many of you are interested in going in the healthcare field. That's your major. Some of you have indicated you are interested in occupational therapy. So when you're going to be working with older adults, understanding their mental health is going to be important. We tend to think of those things as separate, working in the physical realm when we think about helping people to improve their overall quality of life that's related to their physical abilities. We think of that, I think, as being disconnected from issues like depression or anxiety, but those are all interconnected. Our mental health, our physical health, our cognition, all of those are interrelated. And when we improve one, we can see an improvement oftentimes in another area. We know too that depression is associated with increased mortality. So it's of great interest to screen for depression and find proper treatments for people who are in older adulthood. And then, of course, promoting mobility. We know, for example, that regular walking can decrease the onset of physical disability in older persons. Another very important area of study is undernutrition. And this is a major factor associated with mortality in people in late adulthood. And so identifying new approaches to the management of weight loss in older people have included things like, I remember recently reading about the use of taste enhancers and giving caloric supplements between meals rather than with a meal. So this is important because how much nutrition an older person gets has an effect on many areas of their life. For example, it can affect their immune functioning. When individuals who are at any age are not getting proper nutrition, they're not getting the vitamins and minerals and trace elements that they need. And this, of course, can affect cognition, it can affect immune functioning, it can affect the energy levels that an individual has and whether or not they have the energy to get the physical activity that they need. So all of these are interrelated. And then we also have cardiovascular disease. This is a big topic, and this is because it's present in over half of the older population. And in people who live in nursing homes, the rate is even higher. So decreasing the risk of cardiovascular disease, decreasing it earlier than when someone gets into late adulthood. A lot of this starts when people are in early adulthood and middle adulthood. The choices we make now affect us later. This is going to have a positive effect if we can make good choices, each of us individually. When we're young, this can then have a positive effect on us later, not only individually, but as an economy and overall, just as a community, because we then will be promoting longevity and higher quality of life. And then we can think about the immune system. This is a very important topic, especially as we think about COVID. As many of you know, the immune system deteriorates as we get older. This is well recognized. And the research suggests that nutritional supplementation, physical exercise, that these can both boost the immune system. And we know how important this is because when people do not have a strong immune system, they are more vulnerable to new infectious diseases like COVID. Now, I think one of the most interesting topics is this idea of prolonging the human lifespan. And that's why I have here the merchants of immortality. And so I remember when I was a kid, I wondered how long will people be able to live when I get into late adulthood? And we all hope that this age is going to continue to increase. And it will, as long as we make healthy choices and as long as we address significant issues within our society. One of those is, of course, obesity, and the other, believe it or not, that contributes to our overall life expectancy is drug addiction. We know that the US life expectancy actually has not risen like it should have or like it had historically because so many young people have been dying from drug addiction. So addressing that is going to be very important as we think about promoting longevity and as we think about increasing the overall life expectancy. But the extension of life, living as long as we can, this is a very interesting area of research for gerontologists. And so this, of course, is coupled with some potential ethical issues where we don't want to compress morality. We want to make sure that we maintain morality, but at the same time, all of us would like to be able to live longer lives. And a particularly aggressive area of longevity research is the study of the factors that distinguish the successful old, especially centenarians, and we'll be looking at that in this module, from the rest of the population. And they're doing this in the hope of really unlocking the genetic keys to longevity. By the end of this section, and after having read the section in your textbook on demographic information related to late adulthood, you should be able to describe the increase in the number of individuals who are currently identified as late adults. You should also be able to describe the increase in late adulthood worldwide. You should be able to explain gender and ethnic differences in the number of individuals identified as late adults. And you should be able to explain the different ways that developmental psychologists describe aging. You should also be able to explain the difference between lifespan and life expectancy and define the 3 age categories for late adulthood. You should also be able to explain what factors contribute to becoming a centenarian. Studying late adulthood is important for all of us for many different reasons. One important reason is because adults who are age 65 and over are the fastest growing segment of the US population. Also, a current 65-year-old can expect to live 19 more years. This is a significant change since the 1950s. So here in the 1950s, we would have expected a person to only live about 13 and a half years after the age of 65. Also, because we see such a significant shift in the overall population and an increase in the number of older people living in our population, this is going to affect work. It's going to affect healthcare, housing, social security, caregiving, and adaptive technologies. As Table 9.1 in your textbook points out, there's been a dramatic shift or dramatic increase in the population of people who are ages 65 and over. If we look at people in 2012, the rate or the percentage of people who were over 65 was 13.7%. It's projected that by 2030, that percentage will be 20.3%. And of course, this will have a significant effect on those things that I just mentioned, including social security, housing, the need for adaptive technologies, and social security. You can also see that there's going to be an increase by the year 2030 in the percentage of people who are living beyond the age of 85. So this is an interesting chart for us to reflect on as we think about the different needs that we will have within our society and the different expenses that we're going to incur as a society. It's also exciting for us to think about this because many of us have parents or grandparents who are in this age group, and it's wonderful to think about how people who are in this segment of the population are going to be able to be living longer so that we can enjoy their company for many more years than we would have been able to in the past. Older people are a rapidly growing proportion of the world's population. People are living longer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is living healthier. This increase in the aging population presents many opportunities, but it also presents many public health challenges that each country will have to prepare for. And the percentage of people who are ages 65 and up is going to vary by country. And your textbook provides a table, Table 9.2, that points out the percentage of citizens ages 65 and older in 6 developed countries. And I think it's very interesting to note that by the year 2050, it's projected that 40% of Japan's population is going to be over the age of 65. So some of those issues that we just reflected on that are related to this increased aging population are going to be of significant, even greater significant importance in Japan than they would be, for example, in the United States. You also note too that Germany is not far behind at 30%, and Italy also at 31%, and Russia at 26%. So there are going to be these increasing demands on the overall system, meaning the overall economy for people, for meeting the needs of people who are ages 65 and over. And again, these relate back to, in our country, Social Security. When we think about other countries, we could think about their retirement system. We could think also about healthcare And we could also think about a lot of different occupational areas that we're going to see a significant increase in growth. There are two important terms that we need to know in our study of human development. One is life expectancy and the other is lifespan. These two terms are often used interchangeably, but they have very different meanings. Lifespan is the greatest age reached by any member of a given population or species. Life expectancy is the number of years a person is expected to live from a specific starting point. Your life expectancy changes as you grow older and as you face different risks. So think about this. Many infants and young children in the United States used to die from infections. High infant and child mortality kept life expectancy low well into the 20th century. But once people passed through those vulnerable years, life expectancy was much higher. So for example, the life expectancy for a female born in 1900 was about 48 years of age. But if she reached the age of 20, her life expectancy was over 60. And at age 40, her life expectancy was nearly 70. Sometimes when we tell kids that the life expectancy in 1900 was 48, they think that that means that at age 48, people were old and decrepit, instead of understanding that 48 is an average, and that high infant mortality brought that average way down. As you noted from the last slide, overall, women do have a higher life expectancy than men, although like I had mentioned, we do see women lagging behind other countries when we think about women in the United States and their life expectancy increases over the past few decades versus those of other developed countries. When we see men and women, if we look at their overall life expectancy, though, we typically see that in each country, women tend to live longer, that they have a higher life expectancy. And there are a variety of reasons for this. One is better immune functioning and lower rates of mental illness. Also, estrogen seems to have a protective factor or effect on the circulatory system. And then women tend to have better health. As you can see here, life expectancy varies by race and ethnicity in the United States. There are three main determinants of life expectancy that impact this gap. These include economic circumstances, medical and behavioral issues, and geographic and environmental conditions. Let's take a moment to think about the impact of economic circumstances. Researchers suggest that 80% of the life expectancy between Black and white men could be attributed to socioeconomic factors. Several of the states with the lowest life expectancies, like Alabama, Mississippi, and Kentucky, are also some of the states with the highest poverty rates. And those who live in poverty often have less access to education, healthcare, nutritional food, housing, and other factors which can help to lead to better health outcomes and affect life expectancy. Let's now think about behavioral issues. What behavioral factors do you think might contribute to the higher life expectancy seen among Asian Americans? Some important factors are related to diet, which among Asian Americans is more likely to include fish rather than red meat. Both white and Black Americans tend to eat more red meat and less fish, and we know that high consumption of red meat can contribute to high cholesterol and therefore an increased risk of heart disease, which we know is one of the leading causes of death among whites and Blacks. Often when we think about aging, we think about retirement and late adulthood as a homogeneous age period. So in other words, we may think of everyone who is over the age of 65 as being about the same. But actually, gerontologists, they like to classify old age into three periods, as is described in your textbook. And we can think about this as the period of 65 to 84, and this is considered young old. And people in this period are in generally good health. They are socially engaged and they have healthy or good cognitive functioning. And then we have what is called the oldest old, and this is from ages 85 to 99. And people in this group have increased health problems and increased care needs. And then we have the centenarians who are over 100. And these individuals are often in good health until their 90s. And then there may be a rapid terminal decline close to death. So what have you learned? You learned about the important population trends related to late adulthood that will occur in the US and around the world. And you learned about the effects of these population trends. You learned about gender and ethnic differences in the number of people identified as late adults and some of the reasons that these differences exist. You also learned about the difference between lifespan and life expectancy. And you learned about the 3 age categories for late adulthood and why there are 3 age categories. You also learned about the factors that contribute to becoming a centenarian. You'll find in the supplemental notes a reference to a great book about increasing your likelihood of becoming a centenarian and the variables that can contribute to a long life. In our next video, we're going to be looking at physical development during late adulthood. We'll look at many of the physical changes and issues that people face during this stage. As always, if you have any questions after reading or watching this video, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.